Welcome everyone to another Women in VFX Global Panel event. And thank you for joining us on this Oscar Sunday. And for those who are going to watch on our YouTube channel, hello. My name is Shaina. I coordinate all the virtual events for Women in VFX. Today I am a panelist as well, so I will wait to introduce myself. But I do want to give a shout out to Emma. She'll probably be here in a little bit, but she is the founder of our Discord server. She started it in 2020 over the pandemic, and she spends a lot of time engaging with our members and keeping the conversations going. So I just wanted to thank her for all of her efforts. The Discord for me, at least, was a highlight during the pandemic to connect with so many people who identify as women in VFX from around the world, and allowed us to have this great space to discuss issues we face in the workplace and make connections at a time that we couldn't leave our house. So if you're not a member yet, we encourage you to join our Discord and find more women in the industry like you. If you are a member and would like to become more involved, please do reach out to either me or Emma, and we would be happy to work with you. So today's panel topic is all about celebrating women who are authoring or contributing to books about visual effects. Moderating today is Alisha. So you might have seen her recently on some other Access VFX panels and things like that. So she created this panel topic combining a few themes for the month of March. So we have Women's History Month, which we just had International Women's Day on Friday. And then we had Be an Author Month. So that includes World Book Day, which also happened this past week. So combining all that together, we are celebrating authors. So if you have any questions for the panelists during the event, please type in the chat your question, and we will get to it when we can. And the other way you can do it is use the raise your hand function in Zoom, and we'll call on you throughout. If you want to remain anonymous, you can direct message me and I can ask the question or on your behalf or send it to Alisha to do that. We expect the discussion with a Q&A to go a little over an hour, so feel free to stick around as long as you can. If you have to go, we are recording, so you can watch anything you miss on our YouTube channel if you're not able to stay the whole time. With all that being said, I'm now going to pass it off to Alisha. So again, she's the moderator for today, and thank you all for coming, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. So hello, and thank everyone for coming again. Today we'll be having a discussion celebrating, as Shaina quoted, the convergence between International Women's Day, World Book Day, and the many other days that we're celebrating this month within the dynamic realm of visual effects. Today, we're not only going to appreciate the incredible contributions of the women in the visual effects industry, but also explore the narratives that have transcribed there within their experiences. Today, today's discussion will be a celebration of the multifaceted talent within the visual effects world, an exploration of explored and learned knowledge, and an insight to the stories being told. So to begin, I would love for each of our panelists to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Klaudija Cermak. I'm UG Program Leader for Visual Effects and Visual Effects Compositing Lecturer at Escape Studios in London.
My name is, sorry.
All right, go ahead, Kate.
My name is Kate Xagoraris. I'm an effects artist at Spin VFX in Toronto. And I'm also a professor at Conestoga College and Think Tank.
I'm Lisa Sepp-Wilson. I'm head of production at Frame by Frame in Rome. I'm also a visual effects producer, supervisor, and second unit director.
I'm Shaina Holmes. I'm a visual effects supervisor, producer, and artist. I'm in New York State currently, and I also run Syracuse University's visual effects and post-production program for their television, radio, film degree.
My name is Laurie Powers-Going, and I am in Austin, Texas, and I am a compositor, VFX supervisor, producer, independent filmmaker, and more recently, board member of the new Texas section of the Visual Effects Society.
Amazing. Well, thank you, ladies. Each of these lovely people have either worked on or is working on a book catered to the industry of visual effects. Perhaps each of you could tell us about the books you're writing on, and what motivated you to undertake the task of working on such a project. Should we start with Shaina and Laurie?
Well, so our book is called Visual Effects for Indie Filmmakers. And really what motivated us to get started on this book is that we both work with a lot of indie filmmakers and have found that so many people just don't have a basis for working with visual effects. You know, there's books out there that tell you how to do, or how really big studio features created their visual effects, but that's not practical for independent filmmaking. Or it tells you how to be a visual effects artist. So we really wanted a book, a resource that would kind of help filmmakers understand how to approach visual effects at an independent and low budget film level.
Yeah, and it includes visual effects from all stages. So from pre-production all the way through post. It has tips and tricks. So if you don't have a visual effects person on your team, what can you kind of do on your own as a filmmaker in production and pre-production that can set you up for success in post-production? It's also how you work with, as a filmmaker, how do you work with a post house and other VFX professionals. It also has testimonials from people from all different parts of the industry. So not only visual effects side, but stunt performers and coordinators, as well as screenwriters and people who have to understand what costs are when they're pitching a project. So they need to talk to visual effects ahead of time to figure out, can their project even be done in the budget that they're asking for? So things that you need to find out early on in the process. So yeah. The audience is basically, it's a couple different ways that we talk about visual effects in the book. So our direct audience is the filmmaker, so an independent filmmaker. But you could use it in an educational setting for any part of filmmaking. So you could be in cinematography, and how do you fit into the big VFX pipeline? Same thing, if you are a visual effects professional, this could also help you in, say you're an artist currently, but you want to start working with clients on your own. So this could really help you understand what bidding is like and what you need on your end to ensure that you can work with clients effectively, and kind of things to be aware of that are misconceptions that indie filmmakers sometimes assume you know. And when you start working with them, you find out, oh, this is not what I had in store from the beginning. So we're trying to be informative for all sides in our book. And yeah, so a VFX guide to work with filmmakers and VFX and collaborate.
Yeah, I think it's like, to sum it up, I would say that it's really what visual effects insiders wish filmmakers and the rest of the industry kind of knew about visual effects, but also just we also want people to know that it's not scary to approach visual effects, and you definitely can do it.
Thank you. Perhaps we go to Lisa next.
Sorry about that. Well, I mean, my role in working on a visual effects book was as a co-editor of the third edition of the Visual Effects Society Handbook. So it was, I mean, it was a bit of a passion project for me in that I had been bugging the team, Susie and Jeff, to allow me to help out with this book for a number of years. And the role was really to comb through all of the material as sent in by visual effects soups and producers and compile it and organize it and then go and edit. And to be honest, I mean, some people who are super technical and fabulous at what they do in the film industry are terrific, but they don't know how to write, and they need an editor or three to go through their material and make it into something cohesive, which I found an incredible challenge, but it was also so educational and so interesting to see the various things that were written by different people from all walks of life in the visual effects industry. And I think, I mean, for me, I really wanted to be part of it just because the VES is just such a big part of our industry these days. And the handbook, I mean, it's, you know, the printed version as well as the online version is such a great resource. I think it's a really underutilized resource, but in being part of it, I've also become kind of an ambassador for it. I like to tell people about it and say, you know, if you bought a hard copy of the book, in the back of the book, there's a code, you can go online, that you can find anything you need there. I love the fact that it is updated every few years, and it's encouraged me to write my own little blurb about post-production and visual effects, something that I did a few years ago. I did a bit of a blog. Now that I'm in Rome, I started to think about doing more of a podcast, but being too busy, haven't been able to do that. So that was my contribution to the literary side of visual effects anyhow.
Amazing. Maybe one day on the podcast, hopefully.
We'll see. It might be in Vancouver again or something. I'm not sure.
That would be really cool. Next, I think, Klaudija, would you like to share?
Yes, I'm writing Introduction to Visual Effects Compositing, the Craft and Career for Routledge, which is due out in 2025. So I'm at a research phase, but you know, the outline of the book is quite clear, and it's clear even from the title. Basically, the sort of skills you would require to enter compositing, and the career path or the hierarchy you would have to go through, you know, to maybe become visual effects supervisor. So craft-wise, all the different, you know, tips how to get the entry-level skills. I think that's something that's been missing. You know, we haven't had a book that would actually define exactly what visual effects compositors need to do to progress their career or to enter the industry. So yeah, that's basically what the book is about.
Amazing, thank you. And last but not least, Kate.
Hi, so I'm reading a book. It's currently in progress, and the working title is CGI or Canadian Generated Imagery, and it's all about the history of VFX, the visual effects industry in Canada, and you know how CGI and post-production has combined to create the industry as we know it today. And it all kind of came out of an idea when I was really questioning and asking questions to a lot of people I worked with and saying like, oh, like, how did this come to be? Or like, you know, how, you know, what was this first studio in Canada and for VFX? And nobody could give me a correct answer. And I ended up having to go find the answers by myself. And then along the way, I had a supervisor say, you should turn this into a book. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And that's kind of how it got started. So it's been a really fun journey and getting to know everyone's personal stories, and there's a lot of information like people have trusted me with to write about, and I feel like it's a very big privilege to, you know, write everyone's stories down. And try and put together the history of this entire kind of industry in the country.
Oh, that's amazing. I think all your specific motivations are also very interesting. It leads me to understand how an array of perspectives are important when it comes to writing literature, especially as an example, female authors in visual effects. Kate, in your current writing of Canada's post-production industry, how do you believe your personal perspective has influenced your writing approach?
Well, it's been interesting because there's been so many interesting historical figures that I've learned about. Like people who founded like the National Film Board of Canada, or people who helped develop the first computer animation systems in Canada. And you get very hyped up when you read about them. You're like, wow, this person did all these amazing things. And they, for example, there's one of the founders of the National Film Board. His name was John Grierson, and he coined the film documentaries. He literally started to create the film industry as we kind of know it today, or very early forms of it. He hired the first animators to work for the NFB, like Norman McLaren and Evan Lambert, who was hearing impaired, and the first female animator to be hearing impaired in Canada. And he did all these amazing things, but he was very well known for not being a great guy to women. And so that's really influenced me. Being a woman myself has really influenced my perspective in that. And you go, okay, was it the time period that he lived in, or was it just him himself being a bad person? And it's like it's sometimes like you have to stop fangirling really over all these achievements people have done, and really kind of stop and analyze like their entire journey and how they became who they are through all these experiences. And it's a lot of like, it definitely brings out a lot of self-reflection when I look at a lot of historical people and people that I talk to in the industry. And because you can't always write about the good. You have to also factor in other experience as well, but you also have to write about it in a tasteful way, which is the hardest part.
Yeah, of course. In regarding unique perspectives, I feel like Shaina and Laurie, your perspectives are really unique, especially considering the direction of your book and who it actually caters to regarding audience. Do you potentially have anything to touch on in that matter?
I just think, unfortunately, being a woman in visual effects, you are still such a minority in the industry. And so I know we were very aware of that as we started writing, to make sure that at least, we represented filmmakers and visual effects, the people that we interviewed and the examples that we used, that we were very aware of how we represented people, a broad spectrum of people. Shaina, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, we had lots of conversations about pronouns when we were talking about examples that we were coming up with. And kind of like Laurie was saying, we looked also at multiple representing people from multiple countries as well. Since we are both from the US, we do have a lot of connections throughout the world, and we want our book to be utilized throughout the world. The industry is very similar as far as the type of topics we're talking about. So we felt it was important to have not only the way we talk about things, but the people we interview to be as diverse as possible.
Yeah, I think we just think about that a lot more than, say, a man just sitting down writing who might not be as aware of the situations just because of exposure.
Oh, that's really interesting. I like the highlight of interactions and collaborations and how they're definitely key components within any industry, as well as life itself is important. Collaborating and interacting with people is really important to enable us to grow and learn and navigate within any community. Which actually reminds me, Klaudija, you have a first book out and it mentions tips on interacting with clients and colleagues. Do you have any advice that you'd offer for people facing specific challenges within professional relationships?
Yeah, and that was a booklet I wrote 11, 12 years ago. And I just need to say something about it because it's called How to Get in Film Advertising, Television Post-Production, How to Get in and Survive, basically. And it's the alternative guide. So just to explain, it's a small booklet in which I gave a lot of soft skills tips because I used to give some talks at universities, and students would always ask me the same questions, and I realized that certain things weren't taught. So I tried to write this very small book, and I tried to make it as funny as possible. I did have tips, different types of tips, especially, some of them specifically being a woman, and I touched upon that, being a woman in visual effects. And I think the greatest challenge women face in visual effects, or in most of the industries really, is when they start a family. And I feel in visual effects that's really true, because they're less able to socialize and keep developing relationships with peers and clients, let's say outside work. And that has always been an important part of the job, this keeping the social interactions going. So often when you have a child, choosing a company you want to work for is very important aspect to it. Making sure that company is child friendly, somebody who wants to retain the career. And I gave an example in that book of me going for an interview when my child was 1. And I was asked by the MD of the company, so what would you do if your child had an accident? Would you just run off and leave the clients behind? I found it really quite shocking. So I thought for a minute and replied, no, I would take them with me. Because obviously by that time I didn't really care for that job, because I didn't want to work for that company, under these sort of circumstances. So, so one of the tips in a book is that, when you go for an interview, you are basically not the only one to be chosen, but you have to choose the right company to work for as well, right? That will offer the right environment for you to be able to thrive. Maybe offer, these days, some of the companies may offer some sort of support in childcare. When I had a child, that was like 28 years ago, of course, I was able to bring her to work. If I had to work weekends, I was able to bring her to work, or runners would sometimes go and pick her up from school if my au pair was ill and so on. So I had some sort of unconventional support. But I think these days you would expect to have something a little bit more structured.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm curious regarding Lisa as well, because I feel like you've worked in an abundance of different environments within our industry. And I was wondering if you'd potentially have any advice for people facing any specific challenges regarding relationships within our industry.
Well, I mean, I've been doing this for almost 30 years as well. And I have to say, when I was first starting out in Vancouver in the mid-90s, there were not a lot of women. I could count on a couple of hands. Most of the women that I met were in post-production. And it was an interesting time because it never occurred to me that I was, a minority. I just kind of, put my head down and went to work. But when I did finally have children, quite a few years later, 10 years later, I guess, it was, again, difficult because the company, I mean, when I finally had my children, I owned a visual effects facility, so I could bring them to work or I could leave them at home with help, but that's not the case for most people. And when I had my studio, people could bring their kids to work. It wasn't ideal, but we didn't have enough people in the building to have our own daycare, but we did help source daycare for the people, men and women, who had children and needed help, and we were always very flexible. So that's something that I tell people. I mean, obviously women in particular at this point, when you're going to work for a company, it's like you said, you're not just interviewing yourself. They're interviewing your entire family to see how would you behave in certain circumstances. And I think if you want to take on a role, I mean, there's enough work out there these days, or there used to be before this sort of pending strike thing happened, that people could pick and choose where they work. I think that's something that everyone should still take into consideration. What would you do in certain circumstances? You could move your entire life to another city or country and discover that the company that you're working for isn't what you thought. So do your due diligence before you just jump on a role that's offering you, a lot of money or a lot of perks. There may be a reason behind that. Just make sure that you find people who you trust, or, even people who you don't know necessarily. But I find that the community is pretty open and people are willing to share their information and their experiences. And that would be my number one thing to say is, listen, it's not just your job, it's your life. And you want to make sure that the choice you make in, this instance or in 5 years is the right one for yourself and for your family, be it, children or partner or dog. I mean, all of those things have to be taken into consideration. I work at a facility now where I can bring my dog to work. That sounds like a small thing, but it's actually a pretty big thing. She's a big dog, and, she's turned into a big part of the family there. But there's a lot of studios that wouldn't allow it. I've worked at several that, just not a thing. So just make sure you do your due diligence before you jump on a cool role, because you never know.
No, I agree. I think the education of your field alone and how to navigate in your field is equally important. And the navigation factor is not always highlighted in occasions. And I think it's important to share how to navigate, which is why I love all your books, to be honest, and the prospects of your future books, because it's a section of our community that's not necessarily enforced quite often. And it's something that should definitely be shared, how to navigate within the industry and to get into the industry. For example, Shaina and Laurie, your book emphasizes the collaboration between filmmakers and visual effects. Could you potentially share some insights into fostering an effective collaboration between these two groups?
Yeah, I think we've thought about this a lot and we have tried to come up with like 3 main points that we would like to go over with. So specifically for collaboration between like a filmmaker and the VFX side. So number 1, get us involved early. So you as someone in visual effects should be asking to get involved in the pre-production stage, be on set if you can, and same thing on the other side. So you're going to have so many questions. You're doing storyboards, you're figuring out your budget, and you're figuring out your budget for the whole thing, not just for production. So what happens so often is you use all your budget and then you get to post-production and there's very little left. But then you might have like solutions on set for fix it in post, and you're sending more and more to post-production to be done. When you could have had someone on set who could have given you advice to figure out a solution that you wouldn't have to do that much work in post-production. So it's much easier to find a creative solution in pre-production and in production than after you've shot and it's already recorded and locked in.
Yeah, I think once you've shot it, you're locked into that technique. And I just, like, as a quick example, I worked with a female filmmaker, Sharon Arteaga, who we actually interview in our book because she has this great award-winning short film, In Tow. And when I was really excited because she actually did approach me before she shot, which is so rare. But you know, her whole thing was shooting in a moving vehicle going down the road. And so she was thinking like, well, we've got a green screen, all the windows, you know, this is going to be a massive VFX budget. And once we started talking, you know, it was like even something as simple as me saying, how much do you actually need to see out the windows? Do you need to see out the windows in every shot? Or, you know, and the answer was like, well, no, it doesn't affect the story. And so she had cut her budget, her VFX budget, at least in half, if not like down to a fourth or something, just by taking out unnecessary visual effects shots. And so I really think that early collaboration is really, you know, one of the key to not just saving your budget, but really having successful shots, because by doing that, she was able to use that budget to make some really cool, you know, other shots. And in that sense, I think, I guess our next point is just really being open-minded and creative about ways to achieve your vision. You know, you may have ideas of what you want, but just and I think as visual effects artists, you may have ideas of how you expect to do something, but being able to talk to each other, discuss the limited resources, discuss the budget up front, and kind of come in with ideas that you can collaborate with. I think, like, again, that collaborative environment is really the key to success.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times you start discussing the technique before the budget and the schedule. And so the filmmaker or the creative will send you videos like, I want it to look like this, but with, you know, pineapples instead of apples or something, like raining pineapples. And then they show you this commercial that was done for like a huge budget. And you're like, you're an indie filmmaker. Here's how we could do it on a more indie budget, that kind of thing. But that might even be too much for a micro budget or an indie film budget. So I find that if you are discussing the techniques first, you get the filmmaker really excited about, oh, I can do it like exactly how Marvel did it. But in the end, you really need to come up with solutions that work for the resources that you have.
No, that makes perfect sense. I feel like your book puts it into great practice. No, sorry, continue.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think one thing, you know, really encouraging filmmakers, if you're working in visual effects, really encouraging filmmakers to be a little more open about their budget. I think, you know, there's this whole game of like, well, I'm not going to tell you what my budget is. I'm going to wait till you bid. And then like your mind is blown because, you know, you went in with $1,000 and you just got a quote for $50,000, you know? So I think, especially on independent filmmaking, it's really important to discuss budget early.
And I think, sorry, I'm going to just jump in because in the old days, I mean, the old days, a long time ago, I would always say to my clients, you know, how big is your sandbox? Because we'll do whatever we can within those parameters. But it's true that, you know, now we're kind of in a race to the bottom. Everybody's bidding, everybody's undercutting, and then going back to the well later in post-production, which is insane. But, you know, I've been really upfront with my recent clients, just saying, listen, you know, if it's a small feature and you don't have a huge budget, just tell us what it is, and then we'll figure out what we can do for that money. Because otherwise, we're just going to keep chasing our tail. And I don't think that's right. I think that's become a very dangerous practice in the industry. A lot of the really big visual effects companies have kind of forced us into doing that, which I don't think works for a smaller model. So I think it's really important to, you know, really educate, especially indie filmmakers, that they can send me the script. I'll tell you exactly what I think it's going to be long before you even get into your first meeting.
Yeah, but yeah, and definitely, you know, you can waste a lot of people's time by doing bidding on a huge budget or something for a filmmaker that absolutely has no resources like that. So I think, you know, even before you start bidding, kind of having that early conversation is really important.
Yeah.
Setting expectations.
Exactly. And then I like the more restrictions I have when I'm going into a project, I find so many more creative solutions because everyone wants something that they've never seen before, but they want it to look like that, but different. So every time you're doing visual effects, you're reinventing the wheel, basically. So this leads us to our third point, which is don't make assumptions. So on all sides of it. So about everyone's experience, their ability, and the quality of work that they do. So not everyone has the same skill set. Not everyone has the same approach. So every VFX shot, like I was saying, has unique factors that everyone could do a different approach to, and you could get a completely different bid from every single company. So I usually tell people to, if you're asking me to bid your work, that means I'm doing the work. Like you're going to get a potentially higher bid from someone else who's going to bid it all CG, but I'm going to try to come up with a 2D solution for you. So try to work with the team from the beginning that you're going to be working with at the end. Otherwise, you may have like a lot of different things that come up later that you're not expecting.
Yeah, I think if you're working with a particular filmmaker, really understanding too what their resources are, you know, like some filmmakers may be like, hey, my cousin owns a big green screen studio. So you have that, so you would want to bid more, you know, toward that. But I don't know, I feel like I'm just going back to saying, you know, again, collaboration and communication is really the key for all successful visual effects.
Agreed. I feel like that's really great advice, quite honestly. I can imagine you've both learned so much from working in the industry, but also just researching for your book. And it's amazing how dedication to a subject can unleash so much further knowledge and how interesting that information can be. It makes me curious towards, I guess, both Kate and Klaudija within your writings at the moment. What's the most surprising thing you've learned while writing your books?
Well, I would say like I think one of the more fascinating things that I like stumbled across was I kind of assumed that straight off the bat, because a lot of the knowledge in visual effects is verbal and there's NDAs always in the way, and you know the truth is hard to find. I didn't expect there to be a lot of resources for post-production. And then the first resource that I found was like Playback Online, which did a beautiful documentation, and the reporting work was amazing, of, you know, visual effects in Toronto and also Vancouver and a little bit of Halifax in the 1990s to early 2000s. Unfortunately, the reporting is not in best quality as it used to be, but before then I was like, well, this used to be the trade magazine a little bit for Post-Production Canada. What was before that? And then I found this little trade magazine called Cinema Canada, which kind of documented indie filmmaking across the country and also post-production as it was evolving, as we know it today. And it was really fascinating going through that one magazine in particular because it had documents, and I really recommend anybody who's curious of how, you know, CGI and post-production developed into how we know it today, and digital image transfers and all that fun stuff that happened in the 90s. Go and read those documents, because there's a lot of contradictory knowledge that we think is like the firsts in Canada that this magazine actually confirms are not. For example, like there's a lot of knowledge to say, oh, the DNAG was Canada's first VFX union, and that's true. But actually the first post-production union in Canada was in Toronto in 1986 by a company called Astral Bell Path. And like the only reason it got off the ground was because the owner was on board with it and he made it work for the entirety of the company's history. And it was very interesting to read through, and these production magazines kind of documented all the issues that this union had and how they went around it. And it's beautiful from that perspective because everyone was so honest in the reporting. Even the owners would come in and just be honest with the reporters of like, yeah, sure, we're not bankrupt, but we're just short on money right now or something. And they do a funny joke on it. And then you get like cool little tidbits of history of like how like certain companies were, you know, amalgamated into each other or you know, bought out or sold and collapsed. So it's like it's been really fascinating of how every single studio in Canada fed into another studio at a certain point, where it's like Algest Animation in the 60s, which was like kind of the biggest studio animation group at the time, fed into this company called MS Film Arts, and then that into Film Opticals of Canada, and out of that spilled other post-production digital transfer companies that went into the 90s and inspired other studios. And it's very, very fascinating in that regard. So it's kind of cool to see the interconnected web of it all.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
It's really, really cool.
Klaudija, perhaps something interesting that you've learned during your research?
Well, I hope, yes, a lot of things. Okay, so this year I'm celebrating 40 years in the industry. So when I started writing this new book, I've relied a lot on my own experiences. And now I've started all sorts of research. And I must say, I came across some fascinating figures involving gender equality. For example, women received 21.6% of visual effects credits on 400 top grossing films. And there are only 2.9% women who are visual effects supervisors. I think that is totally fascinating. I mean, I just can't imagine that, you know, after so many years, women are have such a small representation. But this getting to a visual effects supervisor role, obviously it's harder for a woman if she's had a family and had to take some time off and return to work. And then I've just come across this Guardian article which cites a study that predicts the achievement of gender equality in the UK film industry to be reached in 2085, in 61 years.
Wow.
That is absolutely crazy. And that's how much we lag even behind some European countries, because in Germany, for example, they are predicting to achieve that in 17 years. Of course, it's not all bleak, because we have Access Visual Effects in UK who are doing a lot, you know, work tirelessly to create opportunities for diverse young people to enter visual effects and animation and games, and doing it through mentorship programs. But clearly a lot of work still needs to be done in that sense.
Yeah, I completely agree. I often speak to individuals that want to get into the industry, and I would always advise to join a community, even if it's within whatever industry you want to get into, or your passion with, or your work. In visual effects, as you mentioned, we have Access Visual Effects, and we have the Women in Visual Effects group as well, which are great avenues for guidance and knowledge, and even just making friends, especially if you're new to the industry. I'm curious, especially Shaina, as you are a great member within the group, if you, just a follow-up question, if you have any advice you could give to aspiring filmmakers or people aspiring to be within the industry, and who are pursuing visual effects or visual storytelling.
Sure. I think a lot of us here are teachers as well as industry professionals. So we're around people all the time who are trying to get into the industry, and they're very eager, and it's so nice to be around that energy, because I think most of us who've been here for 20, 30, 40 years, we get a little burnt out at times. So it's really interesting to see how people are learning these days, and how it's so different from when many of us started out, that we had to learn on the job, and now you can learn at home, and you're expected to know so much more when you're in an entry-level position. But I think for me, I just try to tell people what the issues are in the industry, and kind of get them to be aware of things now, so that they can make change when they get into the industry. So I think retention is a big problem for women in VFX. So if they're more prepared before they start into the workplace, I think even trying to get into supervisory roles and kind of moving up in the industry, I think having a community like Women in VFX that they can ask these questions and get advice when they're going up for a review, I think has helped a lot of people in the past year or two. So I'm encouraged that things are getting better, and it's just time. I think we need to see how all of our efforts recently are going to be lasting.
Yeah, agreed. And Laurie, did you potentially, and of course I know you come as a dream team of a pair, so I was curious if you had anything to touch on top.
Yeah, I mean, I just would say that, like, especially after the statistics we just heard, you know, we need more women in visual effects. And I think that until it's normalized, you know, until we have a much larger group of women in visual effects and it feels normal, you know, we're still going to be struggling with a lot of things. So it's kind of a weird thing I feel like it's almost, you know, saying the opposite thing, that like, oh, going into the industry as a woman, you're going to have problems, but at the same time saying, please do it, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that's important. And as far as like just getting into filmmaking in general, I think it's an exciting time and also a scary time because, you know, right now we're dealing with so much AI and virtual production, and every time you turn around, there's something new. So it's really an exciting time, I think, for people in general, not just women, but, you know, just jump in and find out everything you can. And just, it's, you know, like right now, there's no way even for us to know what's coming.
Yeah.
Know? Like we've been in here for 20 years or whatever, and it still feels like a whole new thing. So I would say, you know, that filmmaking is kind of a combination of technology and vision. So we'll always need the vision, regardless of whatever technology we're using. And I think that is what is exciting right now, is that there are going to be great new opportunities, but just really having that vision and passion is important.
No, I definitely agree. Within visual effects, we have, well, I would like to touch base on a book that we have, which is the VES Handbook, which is a really great attribute for everyone that's getting into the industry, and just to I guess it's seen as a resource for the visual effects industry, and it's described as a must-have for anyone aspiring to get into visual effects. I guess, Lisa, how did you envision the handbook serving as a great resource for experienced professionals and newcomers entering the field?
Well, the way that it's organized, I mean, it literally starts sort of at the beginning where you start the process of breaking out a script. And I mean, it shows you how to coordinate, be a PM, be a producer. And then it also, it gives you real life experiences from producers and supervisors as well. So I think it's a really great tool in the sense that, you know, anybody can pick it up. And if you can read and envision, you know, what it's trying to tell you, it's a great tool. I think the one thing that I would say is, we need a little more support in terms of, I think video is always a really good thing. It's a visual medium. So for me, I mean, reading is fine. But in terms of the book, as a resource, it's a great thing if you're on set and you go, I'm sure somebody has done this before. I mean, that's kind of what the internet does. You go, somebody's done this before, has been in this issue before. You can pick up the book, you can go online, you can find the tool that you need. Somebody who has outlined it and given you step by step. Maybe it's not the greatest resource for somebody getting into the industry. I mean, unless you're like, you know, a bookworm and you want to read things about something that you don't know anything about at all, but it is a hands-on medium. So you kind of have to learn a little bit of the process hands-on as well. But I think for me, it was just like, this is the quintessential book that we had at the time. I mean, when they started publishing the book, it was many years ago, and it's just gotten better and better. And now Susie and Jeff, the VES, have published the virtual production handbook as well, which I was not involved in. But I think all of them are really great resources for people who are trying to hone their craft.
Yeah, definitely. I love the message that Laurie was essentially putting out. Sorry, just to jump back, of just having more women in the industry. And I just feel like books such as all the books and amalgamations of what everyone is working on or has worked on in the past is such a great identifications on how to get yourself involved into the visual effects journey. As much as it is a bit scary at the moment, I think the best journeys are the scariest ones. So you may as well jump in. I have one last question for you all. It's the last question I have for myself, and then we can open up the floor to a Q&A. And I would like to say that visual effects is often considered a very male-dominated industry. And how do we think we as individuals and your books can inspire and encourage more women to pursue careers in visual effects?
Well, I know from like a history perspective, I think one of the things that inspired me actually a lot was finding out that there was a whole, like, Canada had one of the, it was the first like female film-led studio in the world. It was called Studio D, and it ran for 22 years. And one of like, and when I started looking into it, and the woman who started it at the National Film Board, she was kind of set up to fail from the very beginning, because she was 19 years old, and she was just, they're like, okay, we need somebody to start this, so here you go. You're going to succeed or you're going to fail. And as a 19-year-old, somehow she rounded up a bunch of other female filmmakers and progressed to, you know, getting the studio recognized on an international scale. And she won like 3 or 4 different Oscars. And I was just outstanded that I never heard her story before. So it makes me happy to know that, like, there's always been that history of female filmmakers, and they have been successful, but you know that those stories need to be louder and prouder. And for me, that was really inspiring.
That is really inspiring. I've never heard of that story, and it's definitely something that's inspired me. I think just sharing stories in general, being heard and being seen, and letting known that we are here and to speak your experiences, that's one thing that's definitely inspired me. I think witnessing women like yourselves just in your environment, in your realms, in your great habitats, that's inspired me to want to be a part of something like this. So that story, yeah, it definitely inspired me also. Anyone else? Any ideas of how we could encourage more women to pursue?
Well, I think that I think visibility is really important, and that's why and authoritative visibility is important, but not just for women to see, but for men to see, you know, for everyone to be able to see women who know what they're talking about, and have that authoritative voice in an industry, I think is important. And I think that having that will encourage more women to come into the industry, not only because it encourages women to come into the industry, because it encourages men to understand that those people are really good contributors to the industry. And, you know, it is male dominated. So if those are the people making decisions, being able to see that and be like, yeah, I want that person here, you know, is really important. So.
Yeah, I agree. That's an amazing point. It's definitely something that stood out to me. Having strong leading women on my team, it's even encouraged me to want to go into the office during hybrid times. So yeah, I definitely agree. Well, I think.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I think a lot of women are pushed into production roles and producing and coordinating. And even if you like those kinds of roles, don't feel like you shouldn't learn the technical side as well.
Yeah.
I know many of us here started out in more of the artist side, and now we're taking on art plus producing, plus on-set supervision, plus we're always adding on. And the more you know about this field, the more well-rounded you're going to be able to be, and kind of have those extra avenues to move up or move laterally, or try different aspects, like go into gaming, go into animation. Like, you don't have to stay in feature films if that's where you started. Like, there's so many other places you can go, and the more you know technically about how to do it, as a producer, whether you're doing it yourself or not, you can bid it better, find a better crew, manage your team better, and work with your client better. So I would just encourage that, like, watch some videos and be more into the technical side.
That is amazing advice. I
agree, and I even you know, even as an artist, it's very good to move around between commercials, television, and film. That's something I'm really trying to encourage my students to do, because of course, young people, you know, are fascinated by films and maybe, you know, want to work in film, but often, you know, they may be more suited to commercials or episodic or television work. So that's another thing to consider.
So we have one question from the chat, and the question is, does anyone have any ideas how companies can make it easier for women to connect within the office?
I don't really know how, well, from a company perspective, but I will say, like, in Toronto right now, one thing that me and a bunch of other women who like used to work at MPC together, we were finding this issue as well. It was really hard to socialize, especially since we've all been laid off or at different companies right now. So we've actually created a WhatsApp group for women in Toronto to kind of socialize and go to events for. So if anyone's interested, they can message me on LinkedIn if they want, and I can give them the link to that group. Because we go to the animation off the clock gatherings and everything like that. But I know, like, when I was at a company called MPC, we had a social events committee, and I think it was like 90% women organizing all the Halloween events and everything, mostly for the entire crew. And we just found it was an easy way to, yeah, sure, we'll have a committee meeting, but it was our excuse to go out and have a beer after work. And so it kind of worked out for us in the end. We kind of made it our own mission to not only do stuff for the office, but also for ourselves. And I think it just really gets down to, you got to be the first person to start poking people to do that.
I kind of agree with that, especially working remotely, you know, because you end up interacting a lot with men just because they're the ones who are the supervisors and stuff, because there just aren't that many women necessarily in a company. So it's almost intentional, you know, when you do interact with women, make sure that it's meaningful, and that you just reach out if you need to, you know. Sometimes it's just a matter of making an intentional conversation or communicating.
Thank you, Lisa. That was amazing, Laurie. Apologies. I think that's a very good point from both yourself and Kate. I have an additional question from myself, which is based on the conversations we was having. Shaina and Klaudija, we was talking about being an artist, entering the industry as an artist. I was curious if you had any advice for women entering the industry as an artist, especially navigating within a competitive or global landscape, or essentially finding success as an artist.
Yeah, I think you have to, you know, you never stop learning. You just have to constantly keep up, you know, keep up with the industry, be interested, keep learning the new software, you know, be as flexible as possible. I've actually operated like that all my career. I've always used two different pieces of software. So, you know, when I started, I don't know, long time ago, that software doesn't exist anymore, but I always was in control of 2 different softwares. And as I said, I was able to move around between commercials, television and film, so I was always busy. I actually liked commercials the most because I found them dynamic. I liked working with the clients. So it does depend a little bit on your personality as well. You know, if to my students, I would always steer them in a direction I think they would be successful in, or the environment they would be successful in. So when they apply for jobs, I usually try to give them a good advice. Like, for example, last year, students had multiple offers from different facilities, and I would always think of their personality traits as well as their talent and skills and so on to be able to advise them. So the most important thing is to not think, to always have a plan B. If, you know, always have a plan B and have multiple skills. That is really, and obviously be nice to people and get on with people. That's probably the most important part of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna echo a few of those things as well. I think a lot of people are like, I have to, if I'm a compositor, I have to learn Nuke. I have to be proficient. I can't get that job until I do that. But every company might be using something different, might have proprietary software. You have to be, it's more about the fundamentals and how, instead of what buttons you need to push, it's about how do you translate that into any work you're doing. Again, whether it's using AI to tell it what to do and how to get something out of it that is the result you need, or if it's actually using the software yourself. So software always changes. The fundamentals seem to always stay the same. And then the other thing is I always take my students into the field. So company culture is a big thing that we talk about. And I take them within a 24-hour period to maybe 4 or 5 facilities that all do exactly the same thing. And they get to see how each company is different personality-wise. So they kind of get behind the scenes to see, oh, if I were to work here, I would have a window and I would actually have a kitchen that I could socialize with people in, or no one's in this office and I really need that and I don't think I can work remotely and things like that. So I think those are really important. And then kind of the last thing is getting out there, being a good promoter of yourself and your work, and being confident in what you know how to do, and just know that you are still learning. I'm still learning every day. Everything's changing. I'm always learning something new. So you can go in kind of nervous about everything, or just be like, I know what I know, and I know I can evolve and learn and grow with this company. So I think that is important.
That is really cool advice. We have an additional question from the audience. Question is, did anyone start writing their book with an idea of what you wanted to write, but then it changed into something else because of the research you did? If so, what was the change?
I did. I was approached to write on visual effects, I started writing, and then I thought, no, this doesn't make sense. I really want to write just about compositing, because I noticed that a lot of students applying for the courses at unis actually always identify visual effects with CG, and a lot of them don't have enough knowledge about compositing. So I went back to the publisher and gave a new proposal, asking if I can write about compositing specifically. So yeah, that was accepted.
I think that's really cool, because learning about visual effects, compositing is actually something I learned and fell in love with. So I think that's an amazing book to be available to the public.
Well,
kinda
I haven't seen a year's time.
Go for it.
Sorry. I was also gonna feed in with like mine actually had to change. One of my chapters in my book actually had to change because mine's is more from a historical perspective. Everyone is either alive or passed away, and unfortunately, in recent history, we've had to say goodbye to the founder of Softimage very recently, and because of that, it actually had to change my entire chapter about Softimage. And it was really frustrating to me because I was like, I wanted it to end on a happier note. And I was like, and I didn't know how to rewrite it. And I'm still kind of stuck right now. So I think going to be one of the later chapters that I continuously kind of revisit currently because I just want it to end better, which is kind of sad. Yeah.
That's really interesting to me because when it comes to writing a book or research, something I've never considered is how the present will affect the continuous research that you're doing. If something new and upcoming, for example, AI, if something new changes within this instance, then your books will potentially have to change and the morals of the stories will have to change in turn. And even the tenses that you're writing is all quite specific, but very, very interesting.
Oh yeah, it's interesting, especially about AI, because part of it is I do have to factor in the present. So I go out and, have to talk to students about what they think their future might be. And that's one of the things that terrifies them the most. It's like, oh, AI is coming out and I don't even know if I'm going to have a career. And, especially with the strike environment, they're like, will I have a job? Will I even have a job in 5 months or 6 months after a strike is over? And it's, and I think they will personally, but it's going to be very interesting what the future brings to visual effects.
No, I agree. I think that additionally, the points of Klaudija, both Shaina, your points of just being multifaceted individuals and be confident in learning and continuously learning is something that helps and advice with all of those results and will continue to. Sorry, another question has popped in. Are any of you interested in writing a book about a union for visual effects artists?
I kind of have a chapter on that in my book, about the history of them. I don't really go into, I want to make it I'm struggling to make it as unbiased as possible, but it's about a history of post-production unions and like eventually visual effects unions, because we've seen those form in recent years, but they're quite interesting to study. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of paperwork you have to read through. That's the biggest challenge.
Well, I think that's the problem with all of these current events that keep changing everything we're writing about, like on the daily. So I know Laurie and I put in a clause in our book that we're like, at the time of us stopping writing, this is where we're at. So this is what we're writing about. And same as Kate, we had to be very much like, we're giving you information, we're not giving you opinions on how it's being integrated into the industry and changing it. So we had to, it was very interesting because last year the big topic was virtual production. So that's kind of what we focused on, integrating into the whole book. And then at the very end, machine learning and AI and all this kind of stuff became the popular topic. So we were able to add as much as we could, but it's so like evolving that it's just kind of like we touched on it, I would say.
Yeah, it's a very technical subject, I agree, and it's quite hard to navigate. But I guess it kind of leads me to a question that I have, which is things are constantly ever changing within, I guess, media within a whole. And it makes me believe in continuation to Emma's question. If, of course, I feel like this is an obvious answer, but as to why you feel like why any of you feel storytelling is quite important within our industries, and why we still think it's important to continue to document things and It may be an obvious question, but I'm curious of your answers.
I mean, I teach screenwriting, and so story, you know, a lot of what we start out with when I'm teaching screenwriting is the importance of story, because it is what defines a society, and it does help you to come to terms with, you know, being able to understand things that haven't happened yet, or that could happen, how you're going to react, you know, and it really, it's really important. So I don't think that story, you know, story has been around since people could first start scratching, you know, images into sand, or, you know, using basic syllables to warn each other about potential dangers and stuff. There's always story, you know, and history has been handed down through story. So I don't think there's any danger of that going away. And that's one reason I feel like AI is actually not as much of a threat to writers and stuff, because the importance of story is to talk about the current, or, you know, state of human events and emotions and stuff. And that's always going to be really important. And it's also going to be really important that it comes from humans that are experiencing these new trials and tribulations. Sorry if I meandered there a bit.
No apologies needed. Yeah, it was just a curious question, as I do think it's personally important to continue to document the way we do things as of now, and I think it's important to document the way things are ever so slightly changing over time, just so we can look back and understand, as you said, Laurie, the cycle of events that could potentially repeat. And history often does repeat itself, so it enables people to understand how to handle the events in the future. I know we keep going back to the AI conversation, but it's funny because when Photoshop came out, photographers were in flux in the same way about Photoshop in general that I feel like a lot of people feel about AI. And I think it's important to look back at these past situations and understand how they were handled and how they went about, in order to understand potentially the reflections that this could have on our current futures. And documenting that in itself, again, will be important for decades to come. Wow. I think that's all the questions that we currently have. We have a message from Emma. I'll just read it out. Thank you all for sharing your research and wisdom. I would love to see a collaboration book written by you all. Let's hope to make it happen. Maybe one day. I think that would be really cool. I think it'd be great to have a collaborative effort in visual effects and within film industry in general of another book. Of course, we have the best handbook, but it would be great to have something a bit more down to earth. History of women in visual effects. Kate,
Yeah.
you have to take notes.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
Of course. I joke, but yeah, that would be honestly awesome. I thank everyone for attending today. It was a really cool discussion. I learned a lot personally, so I hope everyone in the meeting was able to learn something too and take it on to the future. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Alisha.
Thank you.